we have a Masoros, a tradition from the Shalor, that whatever happens during the course of the week has to do with the Parshas HaShavua. So rather mutant, continually changing political situation in Eretz Yisrael just quote unquote happens to fall between the Meraglim and Korach. So it would seem that the Rebbeinu Shalom has situated it. Of course, people have bchira, but has situated this option, and amazingly, tragically, sadly, but yet absurdly, situated as it is. The betrayals, brings to mind, of course, the story I think that we've told in one of these various programs, that the Reb Chatzkel Sano Zatzal, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, once succeeded in getting a commitment from the Prime Minister then, Eshkol. So this is about over 80 years ago. And Eshkol then evaded the actual fulfillment of the commitment. And one day, the security wasn't then what it is today, and Reb Chatzkel, elderly sage that he was, Zatzal, he just barged through, he crashed through, and there was a little bit of still residual derech eretz, and he just barged through and he crashed into Eshkol's office and said, "Hiftachta, you promised." To which Eshkol responded rather coolly, "Yes, I promised, but I didn't promise to keep my promise." So that's where we're at today. That the people can take the amazing thing of the parsha, of all the parshas in the Torah, of the failings of the personalities, other than the definitive Rishoyim, is that those people who have a rationale, a justification, in advance for the particular course of action that they're taking, and are capable of couching it in positive, in even terms that would be politically correct, and terms that would sound as if it's true. Obama, during his administration, was fond of when there were discrepancies between the reality and his camp's reporting of it, or his reporting of it. He would very, very gingerly say he had a different narrative. Very telling word, the word narrative, because narrative, its source etymologically and where it was born and grew up was in the world of fiction, not in the world of truth. And yes, human beings are hopelessly subjective, but the genius of the Jew that has given us the wherewithal, given us the equipment, the tools to rise above mere subjectivity and approach objectivity. We get bigger the Talmud Chochem, the more the tzaddik, the more probability there is of reducing the subjective component and increasing the objective component to see things honestly as they are, to put it in context, even if it doesn't fit and suit the unconscious agenda. Human beings, as we have often cited in the name of the chinuch, a human being is nifal lefi pulosov. A man is shaped, his personality, by the circumstances in which he finds himself. He did not have a choice of who his parents would be, did not have a choice what era in history he'd be born, did not have a choice in where, the country, the place, the culture, but within the context of the given that shapes so much of his orientation, he does have free will. That's the enigma, the extraordinary paradox of the human condition. The Rambam, in the 13th of his Yud Gimel Midas, emphasizes that these Yud Gimel Midas have to be reviewed. And they have to be reviewed again and again, because it is in the nature of man that there's an erosion of awareness. There's a dulling as time goes by, days go by, hours go by, minutes go by. There's a bit more distance from the experience, from the event, and it's not seen with the same drama and intensity. And the converse is true. If there's somebody that comes with, people are bombarded by the media, by the environment, by the culture, the place in which they find themselves, they find it hard not to resist. There's an amazing medrash. The medrash is quotes that the mitzvah of honoring the Yerusha, to giving it to the Bechor, should not be switched just because someone has two wives and one wife is more beloved by him than the other. So whoever is the Bechor that is his firstborn, even if it's from the wife that's less beloved, has to be given the Yerusha, the mitzvah of primogeniture. Compares the Medrash then that Klal Yisrael, finding themselves in a world that is overwhelmingly hostile to the values of Klal Yisrael, of Am Yisrael, of Torah, they're persecuted directly, indirectly, overtly. Anti-Semitism surfaces, gets reduced for a while, and then resurfaces. Halacha b'yadua, Chazal teach, it's known, it's halacha. So it doesn't have to have the necessarily logical underpinnings that are obvious to us of why and how. Sometimes we catch a glimpse of why, but being the underdog, being the scapegoat regularly that is chosen, and of course the Muslims, as irrational as their positions, are so frequently, so obviously, so frequently, but find an open door in the underlying, at least unconscious, resentment of Klal Yisrael, of Klal Yisrael's coming back to Eretz Yisrael, of Klal Yisrael's being in Eretz Yisrael, and the media, and here in Eretz Yisrael, the leftist community becoming so apologetic and resentful is then manipulated so directly by the world press, and all the distortions that we find from the Hague World Court. Hard. Some things are hard to do a parody of because they're a self-parody. Right? Court in Hague, talking about with all the crimes that have been committed in the last decade by other nations in last quarter of a century that were ignored and are being ignored, and fixing on Eretz Yisrael, who always, the army here bends over backwards in trying to reduce civilian casualties, is being tried for war crimes. It sounds like the theater of the absurd, and it is. But when Jews are complicitous in making that happen, so it's easier. That political situation then surfaces over here. That the distortion of tikkun olam and supersensitivity, we always have to keep reminding ourselves that that is the nature of our relationship to the world, that they have a problem, that they. Of course, there are lonely voices that non-Jews who tell it as it is and say it honestly. We continue to applaud and recognize them. So Korach is a rebellion against the fundamental principle that the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, we are told in the Torah says that this nevuah will be for eternity. Klal Yisrael will believe in the Ribbon Shalom and in Moshe Avdoi. And the attack on Moshe Rabbeinu is an attack on the Ribbon Shalom. It's an attack on the attack on the Torah that verifies, validates, gives witness to the eternity of the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu asks that there be a sign min hashamayim, that it be evident that the Ribbon Shalom has appointed him for his shlichus, for his mission, as Klal Yisrael has been appointed for a shlichus, for a mission in the world. And Moshe Rabbeinu is the Novi whose nevuah is integrally woven into the fundamental principles of who and what Torah is assigning to Am Yisrael in history. All Nevi'im have their role, obviously, clearly, min hashamayim. But every human being has his role. But the Novi is a role for history, a Novi is a role for eternity. But Moshe Rabbeinu is the root underpinning the foundations of Torah, that this has been promised in Torah, and to attack that is kfira. That's a rejection of Torah per se. And Moshe Rabbeinu asks that there be some sign of response, that the retribution, the corrective, the punishment be something which is so unusual, so extraordinary, that it can't be ignored as a sign from the Ribono Shel Olam to corroborate, confirm the appointment of Moshe Rabbeinu. Bria, anu Bria, Bria is Yesh Me'ayin, creation, that the Yetzira is the shaping of the existing matter, energy, but Bria is to creation ex nihilo, something that didn't exist, didn't happen before. So retribution could have taken place, but retribution had to be in such a manner, Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching us, that it defies the natural, the norm of how things work. It had to then veer into the boundaries of Nes Nigla, of a Nes Nigla. The Malbim explains that when the earth opened up, yes, there have been earthquakes, and there were earthquakes previous to that. There have been earthquakes since, but that was somehow a different kind of an opening of the earth that chased its captives and swallowed them in a different manner. It was a ness that was obviously a ness, and that it had to be as such in order to confirm. Perhaps part of the message of the earth swallowing them up, they're talking about a kind of superiority, a kind of transcendent sense of supremacy, that they are spiritually demanding. That's their platform. Their platform is a superior sense of spirituality of all of Klal Yisrael, and they are taking up the responsibility to bring justice to this people that is an extraordinary people, and that has the mitzvahs, and that doesn't need the mashal of a house full of svarim with the mezuzah, the tzitzis, and the tcheles, that if it's all tcheles. Korach, extraordinary personality and scholar that he was, yet has fallen prey to his baser instincts of a need to recognition, a resistance to accept the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he finds alliance with Dosan and Aviran that have been regular resistors and in constant sense of an aggressive fifth column way back in Mitzrayim, informing on Moshe Rabbeinu, and all the way through, resisting even to when Moshe Rabbeinu offers to come to sort it out, that they won't come out. Offers them to come to meet him. there's resistance, and that resistance is rooted in the subjective sense of urgency, and perhaps that this is the midah keneged midah, that it had to be swallowed up by the earth. The swallowed up by the earth is the reductio ad absurdum, that no, it wasn't spirituality, it was earthliness. It was giving in to the baser instincts of man, of a need of to have a sense of lording it over others. Moshe Rabbeinu's special maila that we're taught is that he, amongst others, is the most special is that he's on of Mikol Adam. And because he's on of Mikol Adam, he's attained a level of objectivity. Another way of reading that sense of humility, he has no needs. He has no needs. He has now become utterly subjugated to the rotzen of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and connected to that, and therefore he will be the Novi that is, it's built in to the foundations of Torah, is that Klal Yisrael will believe in Moshe as they will believe in Torah. That's part of the hashgocha, part of the necessity of this extraordinary confirmation of his nevuah as being unique in history. And hein advam, that is what Korach in fact is challenging. The sequence of events differentiates between the 250 chieftains of the tribes who joined forces, but they had a different motivation, and therefore they don't get swallowed up in the earth in the same manner. They're part of a rebellion, but they in fact are treated differently because their motivation was different. Who knows that? The Rebbe Nisham knows that, and therefore the pans that they use to take the incense can be used for the mizbeach as a covering, as a coating for the mizbeach. That there's a certain kind of an appreciation, yes, contradictorily so. They're punished. They must sustain their punishment. They must bear it. But there's a recognition that there was a difference in their willingness to sacrifice in order to, where the emotionalism of the sense of spiritual ecstasy, like it's not the first time this happens in Jewish history and the world history, that the sense of spiritual ecstasy can lead somebody to wrong judgment calls and to make such a decision, like the Bnei Aaron that bring an Eish Zohar. So similarly, though there it's a miscalculation, as is the case with the personalities of that stature, yet there are dimensions of spirituality that will be honored, will be recognized, and history will testify to that. So we find ourselves with in a world where there's a coalition of the self-abnegation of the Jew, as predicted by the Medrash, where he assumes the self-image that is imposed upon him from without by the negative image that he's outnumbered, outpowered, outscreamed by the media and the world, the nations of the world. He begins to absorb that self-image and apologetically and mistakenly, distortedly, perversely begins to see himself differently. So you wind up with a Israel media, with an Israel political scene where can be so self-distorting and strangely, absurdly putting us where we are. The Rebbeinu Shalom tests we've been through. COVID, hopefully. It's here in Israel, extraordinary hashgacha that has taken us out of the direct threats for the most part. The world lagging behind, again, hashgacha, as we've pointed out in the past, and so many others have pointed out, the extraordinary hashgacha that brought Israel up front in then Nebuch, the Lo Aleinu, the tragedy of Meron, of Karlin, of missiles from Arab countries that shooting into civilian populations, and then protesting when there's retaliation to try and stop their vicious attacks. And the retaliations are invariably calculating how to reduce civilian casualties when the Israelis respond. Again and again, pointed out by righteous Goyim, that many of you have likely seen and heard generals and authorities on the military that see the righteousness and the distortion and twisting of it, where the right becomes left and the left thinks that it's right. Perhaps part of the message is just a readjustment, a refocusing of our sense of, even when there seem to be sympathetic, reasonable people in position in the secular structure of the political, of government, of society, as long as it's not connected to the Rebbeinu Shalom and the representatives of the continuity of the Das Torah in the world, then it's got to have built-in distortions. And the Rebbeinu Shalom realigns the givens and reminds us that that's where it begins. It begins with the subjective urgency for self-fulfillment, gratification, expression, and therefore the reduction will always be the being swallowed up by the earth. Again and again, that's going to happen in history. and our opportunity to continue Klal Yisrael's march through history. The Kras Bias HaMashiach is a sense of the transcendence providentially assigned, delegated, confirmed again and again in history, and today, minute to minute, that we're in that phase of Ikvasa de Mashiach, the Messianic era. Nobody pretending to have a stopwatch, a clock, to know where Beita Cheshena come in his time, but hopefully with a sense of tshuva. But we do have that reinforcement that the Hashgacha is making things more explicitly obvious to us, and hopefully that is this confirmation that we're coming closer. The Rebbeinu Shem should give, we should see Bias Hagel B'mheira B'yameinu, Yeshua's Refuos.